Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into how a massive 19th century data crisis led to the invention of punch card machinery and ultimately sparked the entire modern computer era. We kind of take big data for granted today, right? We think it's all supercomputers and the internet. But actually, the foundation of automated data processing was laid over 100 years ago, entirely out of pure, frantic necessity.
So picture this. It's the late 19th century, and the United States government has a high-stakes problem on its hands. By law, they have to conduct the census every 10 years. Back in 1790, this was a breeze. Only about 4 million people, just a few basic questions. But what happens when a country grows faster than its ability to actually count its own citizens? Well, you get a mathematical bottleneck that threatens to break the entire system.
To give you a sense of just how bad this bottleneck was, the 1880 U.S. Census took a staggering 7 years to process manually. 7 whole years just to count people. By the time the data was published, it was already hopelessly out of date. And with a massive influx of immigrants expected to double the population, this was a literal ticking time bomb for the upcoming 1890 census.
Part 1. The 1880 Census Crisis.
The methods they were using were simply no match for the booming industrial age. Since 1850, census clerks used this incredibly tedious manual method called tallying. Think about keeping score in a casual game. Clerks would literally look at a schedule and make a physical pen mark on a sheet for every single fact they needed to count. Then they had to manually add up all those little marks. But by 1880, the population had grown by a factor of 5, and the government was asking way more questions. The sheer volume completely broke this unmechanized counting method. It was crystal clear. They needed a mechanical solution, or the 1890 census was going to be a total disaster.
Section 2. Hollerith's Electric Tabulating System. Enter our problem solver, a young engineer named Herman Hollerith. Hollerith actually used to work at the Census Bureau, so he intimately understood this struggle. And he had this brilliant light bulb moment. What if data could be represented by physical holes? He created a totally new medium to solve the problem, a manila card about 6.5 by 3.25 inches, with 288 specific punching positions. Each position represented a specific piece of a citizen's data, like age, gender, marital status, you name it. Instead of writing things out by hand, an operator would literally punch holes into these specific zones.
Hollerith entered a government competition to win the 1890 census contract, and he absolutely crushed it by breaking the tabulating system into 3 highly efficient mechanical steps: recording, tabulation, and sorting. The real genius here? Unlike his competitors, who were still making clerks sort and count slips of paper by hand, Hollerith's system meant that once a card was punched, manual tallying was dead. The machine took over the whole shebang. To get this data onto the cards lightning fast, workers used some pretty nifty tools. First up was a gang punch, a lever-operated device that stamped repetitive stuff, like a 4-digit district code, into up to 6 cards all at once. Then, for the unique personal details, they used what's called a pantograph punch. Operators would push an index pin into a guide plate, which simultaneously popped a hole in the blank card waiting at the back. It was incredibly smooth. An average operator was suddenly punching 700 cards a single day.
Section 3. How punched cards worked. Okay, so how exactly does a piece of paper with some holes in it actually automate data?
It all came down to this incredible piece of hardware, the tabulating machine. Picture a hand-operated press. Inside that press, hovering right over the punch card, are 288 spring-loaded pins, literally one for every possible hole. And wired up above the press are these clock-like dials that act as counters, ticking up to 9,999.
Here's where it gets really brilliant. The electrical circuit. It's so elegant. When the operator pulled the press down, if there was a physical hole in the card, the corresponding pin went straight through, dipped into a tiny cup filled with liquid mercury underneath, and zap, completed an electrical circuit. That jolt of electricity advanced the specific dial on the counter by exactly 1. But if there was no hole, meaning solid paper, the spring-loaded pin just got pushed right back up. No circuit, no count. It is binary logic, folks, on or off, yes or no, happening entirely mechanically and electrically.
The system was wildly efficient at handling complex cross-tabulations in a single pass. But human nature is going to human nature, right? There's a hilarious anecdote from back then. Mechanics kept getting called in to fix these broken machines. Well, it turns out they weren't broken at all. Exhausted clerks were secretly using eyedroppers to siphon the liquid mercury out of the little cups and squirting it into spittoons. By breaking the electrical circuit, they were literally sabotaging their own workstations just to force a much-needed break.
Workplace sabotage aside, this thing was a massive triumph. Hollerith's machinery delivered a rough count of over 62 million citizens in just 6 weeks. 6 weeks! This incredible technological leap was so huge, it even made the front cover of Scientific American in August 1890. It proved without a doubt that automated, machine-driven data processing wasn't just some wild theory. It was the future.
Part 4. The shift to commerce. But here's the catch with building a census machine. You only really need it once every 10 years. To survive and grow, Hollerith had to figure out how to sell this to regular businesses.
For the 1900 agricultural census, he leveled up. They needed to count actual quantities now, not just demographics, like, say, how many bushels of wheat a farm produced. So he built a new multi-column card and this calculator-style key punch. It let operators punch cards way faster, and his upgraded tabulators could actually add up numerical quantities, rather than just counting single holes.
But then, plot twist. The new director of the Census Bureau actually set up his own in-house machine shop. One of their mechanical experts, a guy named James Powers, built a totally new electrically powered key punch that featured automatic feeding and even let operators fix mistakes before punching the card. Because Hollerith couldn't agree on money with the new director, he actually lost the 1910 census contract to his own former client. Powers went on to form a rival company. This was a massive blow, but it forced Hollerith to pivot completely away from the government, pushing his tabulators into commercial businesses like railroads and insurance companies just to keep the lights on.
Section 5. The birth of IBM. And you know what? Losing that government gig was arguably the best thing that could have possibly happened for the history of tech. That forced pivot birthed an absolute empire. Talk about constraints breeding innovation. Hollerith had started the tabulating machine company back in 1896, but by 1911, aging and facing that stiff new competition from Powers, he stepped down, and the company was merged to form the Computing, Tabulating Recording Company, or CTR. But the real game changer, that happened in 1914 when Thomas J. Watson arrived. Watson was a legendary salesman. He brought a fierce, aggressive sales culture to the company, heavily funded research, and in 1924 completely rebranded the operation to match its global ambitions: International Business Machines, IBM. The growth that followed this rebrand was just staggering. We're talking going from about 3,000 employees and a $20 million revenue stream in the 1920s to a $50 billion juggernaut with 300,000 employees by the mid-1980s. They evolved completely from those early punch cards into electronic computers dominating the data processing needs of the entire modern world.
It is truly wild to think that the entire hyper-connected, big data world we live in today traces its literal roots back to overwhelmed 19th century clerks and tiny cups of liquid mercury. It really makes you wonder, what massive, seemingly impossible data challenge are we complaining about today that might actually be the catalyst launching the next entire century of innovation? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes open for that next big leap.